Welcome to Skravleklassen. Today's topic is ketamine. Sturla, you have a lot of experience.
No, I don't have a lot
with drugs, but not so much experience with ketamine.
I only tried it once on an after party, darkness place. I don't remember even. I was too drunk, I think. But I remember at that time in the late 90s or early 2000s, was a lot of talk about ketamine, especially like this boogeyman story about if you take too much ketamine, you will end up in the K-hole, maybe forever. And this is a state where your eyes are like floating around in the room without you can feel the rest of your body. So many people didn't dare to take it. So that's a bit strange for me to think about. Back then, that was like how we talked about ketamine, and I don't remember much about my life 20 years in the middle, but suddenly I hang out with people like this, and ketamine is going to save the world. That's it's happened a lot in the world of ketamine since the K-hole.
Sorry, yeah. But why haven't you tried the ketamine?
Huh?
Why haven't you tried it more? You've been very depressed.
I mean, when you're addicted to heroin, you get weary of your budget. You don't have much money to spend on
Other drugs.
Other drugs, no.
All right. Today we have gotten two of Norway's foremost experts on ketamine.
And psychedelics.
But
especially psilocybin.
Yeah. But today's episode is the ketamine episode.
I hear you insist on that. Okay.
Maybe we'll do some psychedelics in the end. But Lowan Stewart, welcome to you.
Thank you.
You kind of introduced ketamine to Norway. Is that okay to say?
Yeah.
So how did you find out that Norwegian introverts needed ketamine?
Well, I guess I have to go back a little bit. So I'm an emergency physician, and that specialty did not exist, or actually still does not exist in Norway. When I moved to Norway 10 years ago, I couldn't work here. So I was a specialist in a specialty that does not exist. Emergency medicine is, you do the emergency parts of everything. So you're kind of like an lege that only does the acute parts. In the akutmottak, not legevakt, but a little bit of surgery, a little bit of medicine, a little bit of anesthesia, but also emergency psychiatry. So in the US, the first 12 to 24 hours that you would spend if you had a suicide attempt or a severe depression or psychosis, you're treated by an emergency physician. And so here the system is different. When you come to the akutmottak, you are just, you're seen by, as soon as they figure out which way to go. If if it's a trauma, you go to the surgeon. If they think it's a medical problem, you go to a medicine physician. So I couldn't work here. I worked for a while trying to start the specialty, and we got something close to that recently. But for 10 years, I commuted back and forth to the U.S., working 1 week in the emergency department in the U.S., and then I had 3 weeks here. And after a while, I started thinking about other things to do, and I wanted to get into public health and do something that was more sustainable and structural in health, so that you could actually change the system in a way that didn't just help the individual people you were helping, but actually make some sustainable change in the medical system. And so I did a master's in public health at the university, and during that time, I was looking for something interesting to do the master's on, and my father sent me a New York Times article about some Norwegian researchers who wrote a meta-analysis about LSD, and I thought that's kind of fun.
Like back in the days?
Terry Krebs. And,
Terry Krebs.
Not Jan Greve from the 60s.
Yeah.
Because we make the girl we make a podcast with now about loneliness. She's the grandchild of Jan Greve.
Really?
You know his name? You know who it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Continue. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so I thought if I'm going to write a master's, I'll just do it on something fun, and so that sort of took me down into the rabbit hole of psychedelics for mental health disorders, and most or all of the psychedelics are in research now. They're not. You can't legally use them, and except for ketamine, which
it is a psychedelic.
Yeah. And we could talk about the definitions of that. But if quick aside, you can define a psychedelic. The word means mind manifesting. If you define a psychedelic as something that alters your perception, your cognition, your sense of space, time, changes a variety of your senses. There's a lot of different definitions of psychedelic, but ketamine is considered a dissociative anesthetic, or you could call it a dissociative psychedelic, which would be a subset of psychedelics that cause a feeling of being outside of your body and
your eyes float around
at a deeper dose outside of your sense of self. And yes, your eyes could float around at a certain dose. Anyway, so I got interested in I found out that ketamine was incredibly useful for the treatment of depression, and opened a clinic in the U.S. 5 years ago, and then 3 years ago in Norway. And I didn't start in Norway by trying to open a private clinic. I started by talking to Ulrik Mahl, to the head of the Norwegian Psychiatric Association, and trying to set up a committee so that we can actually integrate ketamine use in the public health system. But at that time, nobody was interested, and so just opened the private clinic, and then in November we finally opened the first ketamine program in the public health system.
So how many patients have you treated at the Axon-klinikken?
I think about between 150 and 200 or so.
Do you do any follow-up research, or?
I would like to. I don't currently. I haven't had the time. So I'm, in addition to the clinic, I'm an overlege at Sykehus Østfold, Kalnes, DPS Moss, and we're starting at Halden. So we have the ketamine treatment program at those three sites. And in addition to that, working with research on. I'm the site physician for the MAPS MDMA trial and the Compass Psilocybin trial. So I haven't had a lot of extra time to do my own research on it.
Have you started what do you call it, psilocybin trials?
We were turned down by the Statens Legemiddelverk with the phase 2 psilocybin for depression trial for technical reasons, not any opposition to doing the research, but there was something they wanted us to change in the trial that couldn't be changed if you're doing a multi-site trial with other countries.
But couldn't you, like, because they wanted you to do a follow-up 6 months after or something?
We were doing the follow-up anyway. They wanted us to change the primary endpoint, which you can't change the primary endpoint for one site and not all the others.
But you could have 2 endpoints, right? One for the compass and one for them.
No,
that would be the secondary endpoint.
Yeah, we had that endpoint anyway. They wanted us to call it the primary endpoint. It's a statistical thing that, anyways, we got turned down for that trial, but we're planning on being the site for the phase 3 trial, which will be next year.
Cool. We're looking forward to that. Sturla probably needs some more treatments.
Definitely.
Andreas, how does ketamine work?
Well, for depression or just in general?
First, in general.
Well, it's a.
Should people be afraid of the K-hole? What is it?
The K-hole is sort of like the peak experience when you're given ketamine in such a dose that you're not being anesthetized. So you can still sort of remember. Many people come from the K-hole, if you want to call it that, with the experience of being reborn or being put together again. All of them have a sensation of being sort of like dissociated from their self, their identity. So that is sort of the experience part. How it works is it's an antagonist on a particular receptor.
What receptor?
An MDA receptor. So that receptor is sort of located everywhere in the brain. Antagonism on that receptor have a lot of downstream effects that we haven't fully understood. But what is special about ketamine as an anesthetic is that it could bring the patient into a dissociative anesthetic state, meaning that they are still able to breathe and their vital functions are kept, but they don't feel anything and they don't sense anything. So you can use this for surgery without any additional anesthetics. And you also don't need someone to mechanically ventilate a patient. With all the other available anesthetics, it's usually the case that you have to put them on a ventilator. You have to make sure that they're breathing. So
that's why people like to use it in war, right?
Yeah, it was very popular in the Vietnam War. Got the name like buddy drug, I remember, and it was because it was much safer to use than the other drugs they had available. It was also the case that if you give a lower dose, it only works as an analgesic, meaning it has an effect on pain perception, and they could use it at the front line and without risking giving too much, as they did before, morphine or other opioids, which could have detrimental effects.
And now ketamine is back on the front line.
Yes. Yeah,
reducing pain every day.
Front line of the war against mental health. Give me a philosophical question for you, Lowan, you both. Is it possible to eradicate all mental health problems in the world, do you think?
I don't know, but what I think is that it is possible to improve on the situation we have right now. You could argue that there's an epidemic of depression in the world. Last year, 800,000 people in the world killed themselves, which is more people than died in every single war and natural disaster. Those are the people that killed themselves. For every one of those, there's all the people that tried to kill themselves. For every one of those, there's all the people that are just suffering and all their families that are suffering. And according to the World Health Organization, it's a leading cause of disability in the world in terms of, years lost to disability. I think you could argue that I mean, there's something not natural about the situation we're in right now. I mean, negative emotions, stress, anxiety, depression, these are adaptive responses from an evolutionary point of view. But the level of the incidence of depression and anxiety and that we have in the world today is, I think, is more of a sign of something wrong. Something is going wrong, and I absolutely think that we could make a huge dent in that and change that. And I think there's two parts of it. One is actually treating people that are suffering, but the other is, what do we do to change some of the factors that are potentially causing this suffering?
What factors?
I mean, in my opinion, we think that about 50% of your sort of genetic. There's 50% of depression comes from your genetic predisposition, and then there's all the things that happen to you in your life, both throughout your entire life, but also and not just things that happen, but environmental factors and social factors that particularly in the first couple decades of your life when your brain is still developing. And I think that one of the environmental factors that's a big part of why there's so much depression today is you could sum it up by saying that there's a discordance between the environment that we're in today and the environment of our evolutionary adaptation. So there's a term that this guy used, I don't remember who first coined it, but it's paleo deficit disorder, that essentially, we as humans have evolved to interact with a certain type of environment over millions of years. And the environment that we're living in today is very different. It's, the environment that we think is normal right now has only really been around for a couple hundred years, or if that. And that, deprivation from the natural world. We spend today, most people live in cities. 80% of your life is spent inside a box, some house building. We spend, 5 to 10 hours in front of a screen every day with unnatural light and social isolation. And I think all of those are significant factors that, this world we live in, we weren't really designed to live in this world.
And what does ketamine to bring us back?
What does
Ketamine do?
What does it do?
What does it help against all those screens and boxes?
Yeah.
And social isolation.
So there's a lot we don't know about the mechanisms, but the things we do know are, so if we start in the brain, kind of at the lowest level, on the level of brain cells, chronic stress, particularly in early childhood, or if there's, you have that genetic threshold for vulnerability to stress, decreases the neuroplasticity in the brain. And so ketamine rapidly stimulates the growth of dendrites, branches between the brain cells, and synapses, connections between the brain cells, reversing some of the effects of chronic stress, which translates for the patient into increased flexibility, resilience in their patterns of thinking and feeling and behavior that are often stuck with chronic depression. There's a metaphor from the I don't remember. Do you remember who first said the metaphor of the snow, the ski slope? Was that?
I thought it was you.
Oh, okay. That's
With you, Lowan.
Carhart Harris?
Maybe. I think so, yeah. It comes from other psychedelic research, but you can, in terms of, this relates to neuroplasticity, you can think of, the brain of a child as this mountain with snow, fresh powder snow all over it. And over time, you make certain pathways, and you take these pathways again and again, and those particular pathways that you're taking become deeper and deeper, the ski tracks. And, the brain is kind of like a muscle in the sense that the parts that you use can become stronger, and the parts that you don't use will disappear. And so over time, some of these negative patterns of thinking and feeling become like these deep tracks that you just get pulled into, like almost a gravity just sucking you into these anxious loops or negative rumination that you get stuck in. And neuroplasticity, stimulated by ketamine, is like a layer of fresh snow over the mountain. So it doesn't actually take away anything. It doesn't take away any negative memories. It doesn't take away the ability to experience sorrow or pain or sadness or anxiety. You still can go down those tracks, but you're not stuck in them. So there's you could go to the right or left. You have other possibility and flexibility. So it's so that's one fundamental mechanism. And when we go up into the brain a little bit to the level of electrical networks, there's two networks that I think are particularly interesting with ketamine. One is there's evidence that ketamine temporarily disrupts the default mode network, the network in the brain that's active in mind wandering and thinking about the future, thinking about the past, ruminating, and I like to think of the activation of the default mode network as kind of the opposite of being in a flow state. So when you're in the present moment, when you're in a flow state, you're dancing, you're having sex, you're skiing really fast. You're not in the future. You're not in the past. You're right there in that moment. And when you're in a flow state, it's almost impossible to be depressed or anxious. You're just here now. And ketamine shifts that. It temporarily disrupts the default mode network, and then afterwards, there's a normalization. So long-lasting normalization, more in the direction of a flow state. So people often describe feeling more present, more, and less stuck in the future and the past, and just ruminating on being stuck in themselves as well. And the final mechanism, there's less research on this, but there's evidence that and in my experience as well, that the actual experience of the ketamine experience that people can have very positive psychological effects. And these can be altered perspectives, new insights, they can negative things that have happened in their life. They can see them from a different perspective. There's something called the overview effect, which is getting some distance from a problem. So it comes from astronauts, the first time they go up into space and they see the Earth for the first time. There's all this shit down there on the planet. There's war, there's politics, but in the big perspective, it's okay. It's not, there's galaxies and it doesn't really mean that much. And so, and many...
Is this what psychonauts also feel?
Probably, yeah. Astronauts and psychonauts. And so many people who have had a deep ketamine experience can have that type of experience. And the final psychological mechanism that is often seen is that related to dissociation is that experience of coming outside of yourself and having a transpersonal experience where you feel like you're not just stuck in yourself. You're conscious, but you're aware of some connection to something larger than yourself, the universe, the world, all the energy, and that's the positive side of the K-hole. So, in the recreational world, people describe the K-hole as quite horrible and this something that you want to avoid. And in a setting like being at a party, hanging out with people, it would be terribly uncomfortable to cease to exist.
I know some freakish people who enjoy things like that, but they're in a minority.
But in a therapeutic setting, when you come to do this with an intention to have a positive experience and improve your health, that's actually, we titrate the dose of the medicine specifically to go to what's called the K-hole, or I would describe it as having a transpersonal experience where you're outside of your body and outside of your sense of self. So that's what we're trying to get.
What does this experience do to people?
In terms of the patients that I'm treating, or
or whoever.
Yeah. Well, primarily I treat people with treatment-resistant depression, so very severe depression that's not responding to other standard treatments. And about 70% of people within 24 hours of the first dose will have more than 50% reduction of their depression, and about 30% of people will be in complete remission from depression. So that's what it does. It changes people's lives.
But in the this is a third or fourth take. I don't remember all the things we didn't or did say, but you told me, because you used to share office space with both my psychiatrist, Knut, shout out to him, who's starting to learn how to treat patients with ketamine now in the age of 70 or 71 or something. That's pretty cool. And you think it's cool as well, you told me. But you told me also that the other people who work there, or the psychiatric establishment, or whatever you want to call it, you have met some, maybe not resistance, but lack of enthusiasm. Is that too harsh?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, it's taken a long time to get people interested in using ketamine, and a lot of people, there's resistance both from psychiatrists, but also psychotherapists. I was really surprised by that, because in some sense, ketamine is much more like psychotherapy than a traditional antidepressant. So there's no pill that you take every day. it's an experience. Obviously, it's a medicine that is a very powerful medicine, but it gives you an experience that then transforms your life. And so in that way, it's somewhat analogous to psychotherapy in that it's using using your mind and getting new perspectives and new insights, and then learning from that. But many psychotherapists here sort of, I think they felt like it was this, it's intravenous medicine. They are sort of resistant to even antidepressants in general, and then this was even one further in that direction, like a very medicalized process.
How does people describe the phenomenological experience? Why do people feel better afterwards? Why is their problems not significant anymore?
Well, the phenomenological experience is, I think ketamine is one of the most ineffable, completely indescribable experiences known to man. It's there's a Buddhist saying, if you speak, you do not know. If you know, you do not speak. I think that kind of sums it up. It's most people that have the experience, and this is at, so I use a relatively high dose where you are out of your body, outside of your sense of self. So you're conscious, but there is a question of whether you exist or that there is a you during this process. And in that realm where there is no you to have a thought or a feeling, but you're conscious, it's very difficult to bring back that experience to our three-dimensional world, to both explain it to yourself and definitely to explain it to others. But the content of the experience could be it could be really anything. I mean, it's sort of almost like a dream in the sense that, some dreams are very vivid and they're very visual, and there's things that happen. There's other dreams where, it's sort of like anything is possible. It's much less narrative than a dream. So it's not like any narrative story happening, more abstract, sort of floating. Things change very quickly. People have described it as like being on a train in space, looking out the window.
Lowan, I have to ask you. If you follow the news now, it's a case about this. I think it's a psychiatrist or something abusing patients. You know the case.
In VG?
Yeah.
Yes, I know.
As you describe this treatment and this drug, wouldn't there be a danger put in the hands of the wrong people, like psychiatrists with malicious intents, for instance? Easier to...
Yeah, I mean, you could say that about any drug.
Yeah,
I mean, every... there's a lot of drugs that we use in medicine that can be used maliciously.
Okay, but forget about the abuse.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of bad therapists, just strict, even though they're not maybe abusing the patients.
Yeah,
they're just
I think I see your
empathic
point.
people. Andreas.
Yeah, because it's a very powerful medicine. Put people in a vulnerable position, and it should not be given to anyone to administer this. So we need to step carefully ahead.
You mean not to anyone? You mean not to everyone?
Not to everyone, yeah. Sorry.
So, shouldn't be given to anyone.
So yeah, we'll have to be careful about who will have access to give this.
How do you quality control? Like, how do you? Should it be like a certificate, or like how do you pick out who's eligible or have the moral compass?
I think one of the better ways to do that is sort of put the treatment in the public sector and sort of not have, if you're gonna, it's sort of hard to make a system that will guarantee no malicious intent or any wrong use. But the safest place is definitely where you, in the public sector, where you have colleagues and who supervise each other. And after that, there should be private practicing specialists who preferably have been trained and have experience with this medicine by proper trainees and proper instructors to know what they're handling. Yeah.
Not to be like a negative Nelly or anything, but I can think of I don't know, 20, 30 therapists I met through my life who I wouldn't want to administer this to me during a therapeutical session just because I don't trust them or I don't think they're smart or empathic enough. So I see some difficulties there because I would have no problem going to Lowan. The only problem is that my psychiatrist tells me that I'm not eligible for this treatment because of I don't know.
I think you bring up a really important point. I think that goes for, you could argue that psychiatry in itself is something that you're with very vulnerable people and working with somebody's mind. There's a lot of room for error that could harm people, but the thing about ketamine, it is and all psychedelic medicines. Is that it's very sensitive to the experience, like taking out people that are just crazy, mean, malicious doctors that do bad things. It's also just the experience is very sensitive to the surroundings, to the feeling of trust that you have with the person. What we call set and setting. So, your mental state going into this experience and then everything around that process is very important to the experience that you have. And it does take a lot of training. It does take a lot of experience. It's vital that the people that do this are, one, trained, but two, just, empathic, compassionate human beings. And that's, really, if you were to ask me, like, what is the best person to do ketamine treatment, it would be,
Jesus.
I don't know, maybe.
You were about to say Gandhi?
No, just a good person.
Oh, a good person,
so it's very important.
So it's a bit difficult. Andreas, you just recently or pretty recently published a book called Illegal Medicine.
Ulovlig Medisin.
How was it received by colleagues and the field?
Well, in general, very good. I haven't had any super critical review of it. It's actually now it's an anmeldelse, a review in tidsskriftet for Norske Legeforening by Andreas Whal, which wasn't that critical. He had some points of disagreement with me, but in general, it's been fun to watch all the good comments. Yeah.
Besides from ketamine, which drug do you think has the biggest potential for therapeutical usage?
Well, the book focuses on psychedelics, MDMA, and cannabis.
Okay.
And ketamine. So I don't know, because I'm not a all-knowing guy, so I don't know about any newly developed drugs that are just around the corner is going to change the world. But I think in the psychiatric field, ketamine is definitely very promising and will change a lot of minds when it comes to, I don't know, how to approach mental health disorders. Because right now, when it comes to using medicines to treat mental health disorders, we sort of give pills that you have to take every day, and the effects are they come in a few weeks and they're not really that good. And this is a medicine that you sort of give once or in a series of treatments, and you have an immediate response to it. So that's very different. And the other drugs that I wrote about, the psychedelics, psilocybin and LSD in particular, but also MDMA, each of these drugs comes in a sort of like a package with psychotherapy. So they're given to you just one or a few times together with psychotherapy, and then seem to also cure certain mental health disorders. So it's the first time I see a promising field in psychiatry where we sort of give a curative treatment with medicine, not only symptom reduction. If you can, be very, I don't know, to be, I don't know the English word for it, but to sort of have an overview of this. It's a simplified view, because you can say that when you treat depression with SSRIs, like traditional antidepressants, they have a symptom reduction, and then you can sort of argue that they have also been cured. But I think this, both psychedelics, ketamine, and MDMA is doing this quite differently.
But many of the people in Norway or whatever country with mental disorders have also a lot of problem with addiction, difficult substance abuse problems. For instance, the people I live with when I'm at Blåkors or wherever, and sometimes we talk about these new things coming, new medicines maybe coming. We try to invite you, for instance, and I can sense a lot of resistance in amongst the people who work with addiction, døgnavdelinger and things like that, because, and it's pretty banal, but it's like, as far as I've understood them correctly, I think that the resistance is based on the thought that these are drug addicts. We can't give them drugs to get better. That's amoral.
Yeah.
It sounds so silly, but I think it's a huge threshold or
I think you're into something. I think they draw a connection between the drug of abuse, especially the illegal ones, and they sort of take that in one package. And for them, it seems wrong just to give anything in that package to treat someone which has some addiction to one of the illegal substances.
Fire with fire. How can we re-educate? Sounds like Cambodia, but how can we re-educate?
We re-educate by Andreas's book. I mean,
and by podcasts.
I think his book was a really important thing to come in Norway. There's this fundamental misunderstanding in the public. It's fundamental misunderstanding in academia, in medicine. There's all these misconceptions about what are drugs and the uses of drugs. And, I tell the story of So, every drug can be a drug of abuse, or it can be a drug that can be, has uses. And in the emergency department, I use cocaine to stop nosebleeds. Pure cocaine,
like Freud did with
he didn't use it to
Emma
stop
Eckstein.
Nosebleeds.
Yeah, but it was something with the nose. Have you read the story about Freud and the cocaine?
Well, but he also used it.
Because he broke their noses or something. It's really, really strange. Yeah, doesn't matter.
Yeah,
he advocated cocaine use.
Yeah,
but it was something with the nose and nose bleeding, and
I think he advocated like cocaine for morphine addiction.
I know.
First attempt at LAR.
Am I the only one who read the Freud
it wasn't that
biography?
successful.
He broke the noses of the patient. I'm not kidding.
Regarding doctors doing drugs, morphine or heroin was used a lot by British doctors. You know that story?
No.
It wasn't illegal until the 60s or something. A lot of British doctors were heroin addicts. You can read about it on Wikipedia. Sorry.
Yeah. But I mean, that drugs can be used in every way, and like alcohol is the antidote to antifreeze poisoning. So if somebody takes the antifreeze stuff in the car, you have to basically get them drunk and keep them drunk for a certain period of time until they metabolize the antifreeze and
methanol poisoning.
So some of the problem is semantics. Like we talked about it a lot on the podcast, and I talked about it in other contexts as well. That like the term drugs, we need to maybe redefine it or stop using it or whatever. I usually say that heroin and psilocybin has as much in common as a pencil and a truck or something like that.
Yeah.
That's my go-to one-liner.
But in Norwegian we have the term rusmidler.
Yes.
Which is I think actually a good thing. But we also have the term narkotika, which
it's a bad thing.
It's a bad thing, yeah, because it's sort of it's actually more of a juridisk betegnelse, like a word just to refer to a list of substances which has, as you say, very little in common. I mean, there are drugs on that list which is very addictive, and other drugs that are not addictive at all. And I wanted to ask you, Sturla, because you brought up this. What about the patients who receive ketamine? They are in a vulnerable state. We should be careful about who can administer it, and that's a very good point. But many people that I talk to that doesn't know this, they sort of the first thing they jump on is sort of like, oh, ketamine can be used as a drug of abuse recreationally, and I work in the addiction field. And I've never seen a ketamine addict. They're supposed to exist in Asia somewhere.
There's only a couple of eyes walking around. You can't see them.
Could you? But because do you know about how in what degree do you see that ketamine is abused recreationally, or any addicts
used recreationally or abused? I don't think there are many straight up ketamine users. To be honest, it's only. The way I look at it, it's only opioid users and amphetamine users. The rest is not. They're so small, the groups. It's not very relevant. Okay, maybe like people who use
alcoholics.
Alcoholics, of course. I thought we were talking about illegal drugs, but okay, maybe cannabis. Some of cannabis users. They're relatively few, and the problems they have are small in comparison to the people who abuse amphetamines, methamphetamines, or opioids, heroin, and oxycodone, different stuff. So sometimes we have that's wrong, but places I stay or live when rehabs. Sometimes there are people who would like different kinds of took too much party drugs. It's like a mix of GHB and ecstasy and stuff like that, but. Pure ketamine users, I don't think they exist in a
no, you haven't met
relevant size, not in a relevant size at least. but a lot of them use it maybe when they party or something.
Yeah.
It's not like the main.
Yeah, I guess that when I researched it, those who used ketamine recreationally and could describe as ketamine addicts in the sense that they were using it very much. They were either like psychonauts, like super interested in the mind, what it could do, what it can show them, and you have some who use it after, like typically in the 90s, after parties with stimulants, they would use low dose ketamine to sort of almost like an alcohol, but not in the abusive sense. Like they were not using it addictively.
If I understand you correctly, where you're trying to go with this is that the resistance from the government or health bureaucrats or whatever is potential side abuse.
Yeah, they fear the abuse liability.
Yeah. And I think that's brings us back to what we talked about 10 minutes ago about the semantics about using the ord som narkotika. Sorry, Norwegian. Altså at vi bruker ord som narkotika sånn, det fører til denne type motstand. Det blir så lett å si hvis ketamin narkotika, så det en fare for at det blir brukt, altså sidemisbruk. Og det, jeg jo ikke allvitende, I likhet med deg. Vi ikke det, hverken du eller jeg, selv om mange tror det. Så tror jeg det et minimalt problem at ketamin vil bli misbrukt på siden. Ja. Men det lett å argumentere for at altså semantisk lett å argumentere for da. Så det derfor jeg mener vi trenger en vekkelseskampanje om forskjellen på skadelige rusmidler og skadelig rusbruk. Bare så enkelt som det når vi begge var veldig aktive I FDR, så var det veldig mye fokus på de kronikkene du og jeg skrev sammen, eller parallelt, eller I hvert fall oss. Og liksom pushe på at media, politikere og befolkningen generelt skal skjønne forskjellen på skadelig bruk og bruk. Ja. Jeg tror det litt det samme landskapet vi I nå.
Ja, og en av hovedpoengene med boka jo å prøve å si at avhengighet eller de forskjellige helseskadene som kommer fra å bruke rusmidler ikke egenskaper ved rusmidlene. Det effekter som oppstår I hvordan man bruker rusmidler. Så for eksempel, hvis du har, sånn som I USA, en legemiddelindustri som har pushet på det medisinske fagmiljøet til å behandle kroniske smerter med oksykodon, så kan du ha de ekstreme effektene vi har sett I USA med en opioid-epidemi. Men det veldig ekstremt lite sammenlignbart til hva som eventuelt kunne skjedd hvis man...
Can I just ask you about the Axon-klinikken crisis in the US? It's like, why? Why haven't the doctors spoken up? Why could this happen?
Jeg kan ikke si jeg kjenner detaljene så godt, men jeg kan si at de begynte å få det for seg at de skulle behandle kroniske smerter I mye større grad med medisiner enn tidligere. Og de ble overbevist av nye preparater, spesielt fra Purdue Pharma, men også andre firmaer som sa at dette her var depottabletter som virker over en lang tid, og som ikke hadde samme avhengighetspotensial som hurtigvirkende.
Det jo opioid, liksom.
Ja. I det hele tatt så det å se tilbake på det et paradoks. Altså, du ser tilbake på det og tenker at hvordan kunne dette skje I utgangspunktet?
When you first talk about it, I want to ask you, Lowan, because you are American, you're from New Mexico, Arizona, New Mexico, ja.
Så kan jeg si en ting først.
Ja.
Og det når vi snakker om å bruke psykedelika, MDMA eller ketamin, og kanskje primært ketamin I og med at det tilgjengelig nå og brukes, så dette her ikke noe som skal administreres av pasientene selv. Altså, de kommer på en klinikk, får dette her der og da, og det ikke snakk om resepter som de skal ha der hjemme, som de kan bruke litt sånn, egentlig, når de måtte føle for det. Det veldig annerledes da.
Well, okay. Ja. No, so about the Oxycontin crisis, I read, for instance, Willy Pedersen's piece about Purdue Pharma and the narrative about the evil big pharma, and how they like manipulated the government and everything. I don't think it's irrelevant, but I'm a bit worried it takes away the focus from the root causes of why people feel the need to start using these drugs, especially in the United States. Maybe repeat myself now, but the expected life expectancy is going down in America last 5 years for the first time in, 100 years or something. There are some root causes that have nothing to do with the chemistry of the drugs or the politics of pharma. You're nodding. I think you're in agreement with me. I want to hear your perspective on the opioid crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I think you could actually use the analogy of gun violence as well, because it's I think it's both. It's the fact that guns are available, but there's also something else going on. There's many other countries where there's a lot of guns, but but everybody's not killing each other. I think the latest data is something like 50,000 people a year get killed by guns in the United States. But it's there's one, opioids are very available. Opioids, and two, there's the United States is one of the most fucked up places in the world right now. It's there's incredible stress. There's huge economic inequality. There's a sense of insecurity for everybody. Most of my friends are, professionals that, should be safe, feeling safe in their life. And nobody is. I mean, people are living month to month. Nobody has, good health insurance. It's basically all of the infrastructure of the country is fucked up. And
sounds like you're describing Libya or something. It's not that bad.
I mean,
but I lived not very long, but let's say 4 months in the United States. I la merke til. Noticed that there's a lot of commercial billboards and stuff like that for medicine or for treatment, like not comparison to any other country I've ever been to.
Like commercials.
Like you are
strange.
sick.
If you feel these symptoms,
either that or gold. You should buy gold. That's a big one.
But I think the U.S. is only one of 2 countries in the world where pharmaceutical industry is allowed to advertise directly to people. I think it's Australia or New Zealand.
Because it's crazy to watch those commercials on TV, for instance, and the last 5 seconds they have this. Have you seen that?
all the side effects.
All the side effects, really fast. It's like a Simpsons episode.
And
the United States
anal
is
bleeding
a bit like a Simpsons episode.
Yeah.
No, but
is Biden going to fix this?
No.
Sure.
Yep.
Why is he never in the news? I never see his face. Trump was in the news every day.
He probably died a while ago, and it's just like they're
Did you vote?
It up,
Did you vote for anyone? Jill Stein?
No, I did vote. I voted for Biden, but my vote didn't really matter since New Mexico always goes Democrat anyway. But it's I mean the political system that's another podcast. Fucked up things.
Have you always been very liberal, or did you become liberal after moving to Norway? You're from New Mexico.
Yeah.
Stupid question.
Well,
he comes from a very conservative Christian family. I'm just kidding. I know his life story, so our bit.
I was
So much.
the first 5 years of my life, I grew up on a hippie commune in Colorado. I was born on a bus, and I grew up in a community of very open people, and the particular culture. And
You grew up in a K-hole.
No, but you grew up with a lot of Native Americans. That's
the culture in New Mexico is a really interesting mix of various native cultures that are incredibly different. So there's like 20 different tribes that speak different languages in New Mexico. And the Spanish culture, pre-Mexican Spanish culture in New Mexico, and then mixed with a variety of European immigrants. So it's a very unique place. We have parts of our culture that come from all of those different backgrounds, and
You think that has had something to do with your choice of career?
I mean,
have you taken a Big Five test or something like that? And
no,
never.
No, I've never.
Oh, okay,
done that.
because I've done it both in an entertainment context and a clinical context. I just know how I score very high on openness. I guess you also do the same. And as I told the listeners many times, they're maybe bored of it, but kind of a hippie-ish upbringing, not Native Americans, of course, but my mom maybe wished it was. She loved that. If it was either Indian or American Indian, it was perfect. Like that was typical of the community I grew up in. Actually, we also Helge Wall lived next to us, so it was a bit of a mix. But if it was either like Native American-ish or like Indian-ish, that was especially my mom. So maybe openness has something to do with your upbringing. That was why I asked.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were born and raised very, very strict Protestant,
No.
Presbyterian or something, do you think you would open a clinic, ketamine clinic in Norway? Maybe.
I don't know. It's hard to say. What are all the factors? But the culture in New Mexico is. So one of the tribes there uses peyote, which is has the active ingredient mescaline as part of their tradition, and it's legal in New Mexico. There's other groups that use psilocybin containing mushrooms, and that's kind of part of normal culture. So in that wasn't the use of those medicines were not considered like alcohol or tobacco or things that were just used for recreation. They were powerful medicines that were actually used therapeutically in the culture that I grew up in. So, my dad, he worked, he's also an emergency physician. He worked out on the Navajo reservation throughout his career. In the Native Americans have their own health system. So it's, they have their own countries within the U.S. So they have their own hospital. So he worked at a Navajo hospital. When I was in medical school, I did a month out there and worked there. And the medicine man would do so if somebody was having a crisis in their life, they would do a ceremony, a peyote ceremony, with the family and the friends and the kids. Everybody would be there and drum and sing together and all take mescaline. And then if it didn't work out, if like the reason they were having a crisis was because they were having a heart attack or something, then they would go to the emergency department at the very end to get Western medicine. And then they would come in and like, we literally did this, like doing chest compressions on something. And then the Navajo shaman is like doing drums,
beating
and then
like
the family's
rhythm
there,
of the
and,
heart.
you know, we're doing this, and everybody's tripping on mescaline in the emergency department, and they're all there gathered around. And
wow, outtakes.
This is so cool. I would love to hear more about this, but sadly we have to end because our cameraman have to go.
We have to make a part 2.
We have to make a part 2 if you're close. Andreas, you're here. Andreas, you're here all summer, right?
All summer.
All summer. And
Boys
Lowan, you
of
will
summer.
probably drive by sometimes. It will
But
hardly be.
I
This is
have
where
a
it
last,
happens.
Any
I
time,
always
yeah.
have a last question after he says we have to. This is a very serious question
Yeah.
because I have a lot of problems in my life, and 50% of this podcast is about my life, my journey from 2018 when I tried to kill myself and stuff like that.
But now you're getting.
I'm getting better. It's better and better, but it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back all the time, of course, because life is full of
Shit.
adversary. Yeah, life is full of shit.
Obstacles.
And my psychiatrist, as I told you or told listeners in either this take or one of the takes before I recorded started, is Knut. He's starting now. You're teaching how to administer this. Am I right?
Yeah.
And I've asked him so many times, can't I go to Lowan and get ketamine and all my troubles will be over? And he seemed reluctant up until now because he says like, no, you have to be, I don't know, it's not for you.
Yeah.
Are you sure it's not for me, or is it a possibility that maybe
There's
my
a-
life could be better if I?
There's a very good possibility. I would have to do an evaluation beyond the scope of talking to you on the podcast. But I mean, to answer the
No, but to be
question-
serious, you listened to this, but you even told me you listened to the podcast to pick up Norwegian words. So you know me more than
yeah.
I know you.
Yeah,
But-
yeah. I will say that, you know, so currently ketamine is primarily used for treating people with treatment-resistant depression, meaning that you have, you know, moderate or severe depression that has not responded to traditional treatments, at least a couple different antidepressants. That being said, so that's the primary indication. But, you know, there are patients who have other disorders other than depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance use disorders.
I have all 4.
And people that have, you know, comorbid, many different things together that can absolutely benefit from the treatment. And you know, when you're using a medicine that's off-label or utenforgodkjent indication, what's important is that, so when there's a medicine that's approved for something, then it's very clear. It's okay, it's approved for this indication. And then the decision-making process to use something for things outside of that particular indication is an individual evaluation for that patient based on the risks and benefits of the medicine for that particular patient. And also, you know, based on the literature that we have for those particular indications. So I guess it's a long way of saying that it's absolutely possible that you could benefit, but that's an individual assessment.
I suggest you join me and Knut in his office at one point, and we decided all the three of us together, and maybe hopefully we can make an episode about how my ketamine treatment went in 3 months or so. Thank you for coming.
To try?
Huh?
You're going to try?
I really want to try. My mom really wants me to try, and everyone in my life. Please try ketamine.
All our
Come
listeners rely on you.
It's like the guy on Blomqvist with like all the other patients was like, please give him the ADHD medicine, please. I can't sleep because he was running around and knocking on doors all night. They tried to they refused to give him them. We had talked about this before. Thank you a lot for coming. We have to run out to Stortinget and support rusreformen, or is it too late?
We have to run down.
We have to run down.
Yeah, thank you very much for dropping by.
Yeah, thank you guys.